This is Dialogue, the weekly interview program presenting timely and topical news issues of local, state, and national concern. Each week, a member of Channel 5's Eyewitness News reporting team focuses on the people and events that influence and shape our lives.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stan Turner, and the topic for this edition of Dialogue is the merger of the Minneapolis Star and the Minneapolis Tribune. As you probably know by now, the Minneapolis Star is no longer the entity it was, the afternoon daily it was, but is now a part of an expanded morning paper. The Minneapolis Star and Tribune is called. On April 2nd, the Star ceased publication and much of its staff moved over to the Tribune. Some employees were offered and accepted early retirement bonuses. The fate of the Star is one that's becoming common to afternoon dailies across the country. Within recent times, the Washington Star, the Philadelphia Bulletin, the Chicago Daily News, and other prominent afternoon newspapers have ceased to exist. The causes of their demise are many. The solutions seem to be few, or at least ineffective. Well, with us today to talk about the merger of the Star and Tribune, of the Star and Tribune's publisher, Donald Dwight, and the editor of the new combined paper, Charles Bailey. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Christopher Burns, the senior vice president and associate publisher of the Star and Tribune, gave an interesting talk to the Minnesota Press Club earlier this week. I thought he was remarkably forthcoming in talking about the events that led up to the merger of the Star, some would say the end of the Star. Among other things he said as to what's happening over there right now, he said the new paper, as we have it here, the Star Tribune, is slightly schizoid. He says that there's not a whole lot of local news, especially out front right now. He said that's largely owing to the fact that a lot of reporters are too busy cleaning out their desks and moving over to another part of the newsroom. And he just said there's very little local news right now. And
well, that's why he's in the publisher's office instead of the newsroom.
That's what we figured, yes. But anyway, his insights were interesting. Of course, a lot of this is part of the expected shakedown that you'd go through after a rather traumatic time such as this. But once the dust settles, gentlemen, what's the personality and the direction of this new paper going to be? Every paper, the Tribune has had a personality. The Star certainly had a personality. What are we going to see? What is this paper going to be all about? Mr. Dwight?
Well, I'll start out by saying with great enthusiasm that I and my associates at the paper are enormously pleased by what has happened and the way that the Minneapolis Star and Tribune has been produced in the last couple of weeks. It is doing exactly what we wanted to do at this time.
Burns says the newsroom is in turmoil right now. It's easing up a bit, but is that an accurate description?
I don't think turmoil is an accurate description today. Turmoil certainly was the character a couple of weeks ago when the announcement was made, and when there was great uncertainty over who might be going and who would be staying. That's all been erased. As a matter of fact, no reporter was involuntarily laid off. Everybody who left by choice with the severance. So the uncertainty that was caused by people not knowing whether they're going to be there or not, that's gone away. And I think now people are
on the part of some people, I might add. I've talked to many staffers over there, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's still some bitterness over there about this, too.
It was an enormous change, and change is disruptive, and change means loss, and that's going to happen. But over time, as with the, getting back to the original question of what the newspaper is going to develop into after its initial impact, that's going to work out over time, and 2 weeks is not a long time in the scheme of things.
All right. Mr. Bailey, how would you describe the character of this paper now, once the shakedown is over?
Well, I think the character, we're going to be a morning newspaper. I think that's the first thing you have to say. Morning newspapers have a specific function in the information world. We try to give people the information that they need to start their day, to go out and live and function in the world. We give them information in amounts that they can absorb and digest in a relatively short period of time in the morning. We give them additional background and longer things that they can read when they have the leisure to read them, whether it's at noontime or in the evening when they get home. This is the newspaper they're going to have here, and I think it won't change a great deal.
Basically the Tribune. It looks, for all the world, like the Tribune.
There's a lot. The thing that pleased me most the last couple of weeks was the fact that the newspaper came out every morning and that it was a professional production. Sure, there was a lot of upset in the newsroom, but the signal fact about what's happened at the Star and Tribune in the last couple of weeks is that a couple of hundred professional people, despite the fact that many of them were uncertain about their future course, sat down every day and every night and put out a very fine newspaper. We can do a lot better, but and editors don't get very far by arguing with associate publishers, so I'm not going to argue about whether it's schizoid or not. We're trying to put two newspapers together here and take advantage of the very high level of talent that existed on each separate staff before, and it'll be seamless before we get through, but we're putting them together now. It'll take a little while.
Mr. Bailey, you'll be leaving your job as editor of the Star and Tribune, I guess by the end of the year or toward the end of the year. Does your lame duck status not hinder this process you're talking about? I guess if I were working over there, it'd be nice to know who the new boss is going to be, what his style is, what his expectations are. Is this a problem? Is the timing
we
that
don't
good?
turn over our top supervision as often as some organizations do, and I think people feel they can feel reasonably confident that when I go, if I survive to the end of the year, when I go, I'll be replaced with a professional newspaper man or woman who will run a reasonable operation and let people do their work. Most journalists want to be, and it is true of electronic journalists too, I'm sure, they want to be left alone to do what they know how to do. And generally speaking, you don't have to do a lot of hand running of people if they're good. You just kind of point them in the right direction, tell them what you want, and they'll go do it for you.
Right.
And the advent of a new editor doesn't mean that the whole rest of the supervisory managerial staff changes. That's in place.
You're on thin ice there. You're beginning to sound as if you're saying it doesn't really matter who the editor is.
On the day that the merger was announced, March 24th, Mr. Dwight, you said this of Stephen Isaacs, who was the editor of the Star and who is no longer with the company. He said he was an editor, or is an editor, of vitality, creativity, and energy. You also went on to say, we need a different kind of editor for the task ahead. Now, putting those two statements together, you would seemingly be saying that creativity and energy and vitality are okay, but they're not enough, or that these qualities are not necessarily what you're looking for. Why wasn't Steve Isaacs the kind of editor for the task ahead? What was he lacking?
Because Steve Isaacs isn't the editor of the Minneapolis Star and Tribune because Chuck Bailey is. And that's the short of it.
But he's not with the company anymore, and you have plans to expand the corporation, certainly, and why could he not fit in?
Well, what you're asking is why couldn't Steve Isaacs have been stockpiled?
Not stockpiled, but used to the best of his...
warehoused, or what?
No, used to the best of his talents.
There was, when you get to the top, and when two units are put together, and there are two bosses, there's only one after it's put together. In this case, it was Chuck Bailey, and I really didn't see a role for Steve in some passive on-the-shelf position. It wouldn't fit him. It wouldn't be right for the organization. When we are deliberately tightening up, we want to be a much leaner organization, and that is part of our general policy and strategy for the 80s.
I don't want to dwell too long here. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask you this about Steve Isaacs. It's been suggested, it is strongly felt by some, that he really cut into the corporate jugular in some of the stories that he supervised, some of the stories that he had done, to wit, the City Venture and the Star Tribune companies.
Could I respond to that?
Oh, wait a minute, I'm not through yet. The question also involves his sending a reporter to Massachusetts to do some stories on the political investigation in which you were mentioned and, of course, cleared. But,
from time to time.
But these did not, I would guess, endear Mr. Isaacs to you, to the corporation.
Let me respond to that. We did all those things, too.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some things that editors do that they have to do. And when your publisher is a subject of news interest, you have to go and do it. And there was nothing in the Star stories about the stadium and City Venture that hadn't appeared in one or the other paper before. And those are not things. I just think that kind of thing is overemphasized.
Well, did the Tribune send a reporter out to Massachusetts?
Yes, indeed.
Sure, twice.
And they had one living in Cambridge at the time. It was and covered during that entire period, and there was coverage.
Was the tone of the coverage different?
Oh, I don't...
To continue our dialogue discussion with Minneapolis Star and Tribune publisher Donald Dwight and Star and Tribune editor Charles Bailey. Gentlemen, some knowledgeable observers of the local newspaper scene have suggested that one of the major problems with the new Minneapolis Star as of 1978 when Isaacs came in and there was an effort to change it and save it was frankly, just a really bad promotional campaign. In fact, the man who then presided over promotion was heard to say publicly that the paper, as it was evolving, was lousy. And those kinds of things really can't help the effort too much. Do you share that the promotional effort was not a good one? Chris Burns said this: "We think we had trouble promoting it, the Star. We had trouble explaining its nature. We didn't know how to explain it," quote unquote.
Okay.
You agree with that?
Chris wasn't here at the time, and I was, and there is some substance to the charge that we didn't promote it well, and I think there was some reason why we didn't. In that first year, from 1979, when the Star made some very dramatic changes, we weren't doing it very well. There would be days when we'd put out a sensational newspaper, something that I really thought was hitting exactly what Isaacs and the Star were trying to hit. But there were a lot of days when we didn't. And Steve didn't want, and neither of us wanted to promote the paper until we had what we wanted and for the reader. Because if you go out and sell something and people are attracted by the advertising, the promotion, and they get it and they don't like what they get, we lose them forever. So we kind of held back and laid back and waited until we had the Star in much better shape, which we did. But by that time, and this is hindsight, very smart, by that time impressions of the Star in the marketplace had been pretty well fixed. And we never were able to overcome them, even though I think in the last year or 18 months of the Star as a solo paper, I think it was doing a great job.
Since the merger, part of the advertising line now goes of the Star and Tribune, the merged paper, a 24-hour paper for Minneapolis. Now, is this a deliberate shift in emphasis from the Trib in the days of kind of a regional paper, the New York Times of the upper Midwest, and the Star as it evolved into kind of a national magazine, to now a city newspaper?
You're talking about there are really two pieces of the circulation of the newspaper, and really I'm now talking about both the Tribune as it existed before the merger and the paper now. There I think you can say that things have not changed. We have a circulation now of something between 380,000 and 400,000. It's going to shake down a little bit, but as of now, with some still overlap, we have that. About 300,000 of that is going to be in what you might broadly call the metropolitan area. And about 80,000 of that is going to be beyond the 7-county mosquito control district, all the way to the borders of Minnesota. Those are two audiences. We try to, they have divergent interests. There are some parallel interests, obviously, but there are divergent interests. The people in the city don't see the paper that goes outstate. The paper that goes outside the metropolitan area has as the cover of the local and regional section, has the state page, which you find tucked away inside in your local paper. The paper has a slightly different flavor and a different emphasis. For 3/4 to 4/5 of our readers, it is indeed a metro paper because that's where the readers are, and we have to serve their interests.
Are you going to put some reporters on the Hennepin County beat? Are you going to have people, more than one person, covering the courts and City Hall? There's been a de-emphasis on that in both papers.
Our friends who are in this business will find that we're around.
Yes, but are you going to staff these beats full-time?
We're going to cover the news, and we're going to cover the government. I don't know whether we're going to spend 6 hours sitting in a county board meeting listening to county commissioners talk at each other, but we'll report the news.
Yeah. But isn't it how you get some stories sometimes, by sitting through those? You've sat through your share of them. And
I have, and I know where I've gotten more news, which is in the hall outside.
Okay, after you sat in the meeting inside. The ad campaign again. Recent times, I've seen ads in the Star and the Tribune that are kind of a knock at television in a way, and this is not quite as self-serving as it might sound, but I've checked on this, and in the surveys, not just one, but several do show that heavy newspaper readers tend to be fairly heavy television news watchers and vice versa. Aren't you in effect saying to these people when you say, you know, do you really want to, did you go to get 4 years of college to get the headlines from a guy in a suit. Aren't you offending people who
I'll tell you what I say. I don't know.
buy your product on television?
I don't know what the advertisers say, but I'll tell you what I say, and that is that I think you're quite correct that people who watch television news are more likely to be newspaper readers than people that don't watch television news. And I tend to think that one of the reasons television news watchers read newspapers is to confirm for themselves, to validate a rather vague and passing impression that they get, that they saw something or heard something last night and they want to confirm it. I don't think newspapers can compete with television nowadays as the medium of first impression. Television has motion, it has film, it has color, it has immediacy in a way that a black and white newspaper cannot, with still photos coming out some hours later. What we can offer is a much more complete story and, in fact, a much larger local news staff. I'm trying to make good use of 230 people to cover the news on our local news staffs now. They cover and edit it. That's a big staff. I would venture that it may be somewhat more than the sum of the local news staffs of all the television stations in the Twin Cities. And we ought to be able to do things that television can't do. TV can do things that we can't do. We don't have these magic cameras and things, and we can't bring the drama, the immediacy of an event right onto the screen and right into the living room. That's not our business at this point.
I want to ask you about some personnel matters. On the Star, you had a man who had national standing as a reporter on religion. Once the merger was announced, this man found that he no longer was going to be reporting that beat. Now, I know he subsequently has taken this early retirement business or the buyout, but why was he reassigned? And the second part of the question is, does this herald a new era, a de-emphasis on coverage of religion, since your new reporter on the beat is going to be covering not only religion, but charities and foundations? Mr. Bailey?
I can deal with that.
Why was Thorkelson taken
I
off
think
there?
I can deal with that. There are two parts to your question. One is why do we assign people to what they do? And we made a decision that we wanted to change the assignments. And I'm not going to get into a lot of public discussion about why we do those things. As for the coverage, what we're going to be covering, I think our readers can be confident that we will cover religion and the effects of religion in life. This is a very major factor in this whole region and in this more immediate community, Minneapolis and St. Paul. Always has been. I have always felt that neither paper covered it in its full significance very well. We did a very poor job on the Tribune. We had intermittent and partial coverage of the thing. I think we're going to do a better job, and I think the readers will have to judge that, and they will let us know.
Yeah,
but
doesn't an area, though, with such high church affiliation, religious affiliation, really deserve a reporter full-time on that beat without being distracted by charities and foundations?
Well, I don't think the distraction...
The religious community is worried about that, right?
I know the religious community is worried about it, and when they're worried about something, you hear from them, and I have. And I've tried to respond to every one of those contacts individually and directly, and I think we've met with some of them, and I think they went away reassured. The readers are going to have to judge for themselves, and they can read the paper and let us know what they think after they've read it for a while.
I know what our director thinks. He wants me to break for commercial. We'll be back to conclude our discussion in just a moment. The Minneapolis Star and Tribune, and maybe newspapering in general, if we have time for that, are the publisher of the Minneapolis Star Tribune, Donald Dwight, and the editor of that paper, Mr. Charles Bailey. Well, I've talked to a number of people inside your operation, and there still is, I can't really gauge the extent of it, but it seems to be, there seems to be a feeling there still that that you were something less than forthcoming, candid, straightforward, and honest with the people as these rumors begin to grow and grow about the end of the Star and the merger. And a lot of that focuses on a memo, Mr. Dwight, that you put out, and I have a copy of it here, on March 23rd, the day before the merger was announced by you. It reads in part, "The Star remains vital," and this is directed to the staff of your paper. "The Star remains vital, attractive to readers, and valued by advertisers. Just shutting it down would not make sense." Now, where did you come up with that language? Is that
because
Can you see where people would construe that language to
they
be
can
deceiving?
construe that. And I think what you have to go on and read is that I said I'm not going to respond to the rumors. The fact is I was on the eve of announcing the merger, and which is not, and the Minneapolis Star has not disappeared. It's the parts of it that have value are continuing in the merged newspaper, and so that was what was in the back of my mind when I said that.
The Star was making money, in effect, wasn't it, when the
Yes,
merger was
I
announced?
think so.
All right.
Yes.
Now, the question then arises.
I say I think so because there has never been a separate profit and loss statement for either of the newspapers. So it's a matter of how you allocate costs and revenues, and it's not that simple a thing to do. But I think the Star was making money at the time we merged.
I think there's a point to be made about that. We have seen in recent years, we've seen afternoon papers fail, and we have seen afternoon papers fold, and we have seen morning papers, some of them owned by a different owner and some of them by the same. We have seen morning papers try to salvage from that wreckage readers and advertisers and advertising dollars, the building blocks of newspaper health, and try to bring them over and bring them on board and convert them. The experience is that if you wait, and nobody fully understands this, I think, at least I know I don't, but if you wait until the paper goes down the drain, there's nothing left to convert. In Philadelphia and in Washington and in other places where afternoon papers have simply failed, Chicago is a prime case, scores of thousands of readers have just disappeared. They've gone into a kind of black hole. And nobody understands why. But if people drop a newspaper and are not taking a newspaper, it's very hard to get them to come back and do it again. One of the reasons for, if you reach the conclusion that sometime in the foreseeable future it would make sense to put the two newspapers together, you want to do it while they're both still healthy. This is also true of advertising. Once an advertiser who has been buying in both papers stops buying in one paper, that dollar goes somewhere else. And you and I know some of the places it goes. You can put it together. If it's still healthy, you can bring him along. And so there are more jobs today at the Star and Tribune in the newsrooms than there would have been if we'd waited and converted the paper after the Star had gotten weaker.
More layoffs coming?
No.
No?
No.
No, not now,
None
not
expected.
3 months, none expected.
None
A year from
expected.
now,
No.
the staff, anybody who's watching this can be, if they're on staff right now, can feel pretty well assured that
There are
they're going to have a job a year from
none
now,
expected.
2 years if they're doing their
I
job.
certainly hope so.
Right.
Well, yes, everything's predicated. I hope that you have a job a year from now. I hope
do
that
I. Yes,
KSTP continues to prosper, as I hope we continue to prosper. But there are certainly, and that is the plan. We have a plan which is to make the paper very strong and very healthy. And that would mean that we would not have layoffs.
What about the Saturday Tribune? What about the future of it? An observation indicates that there's not a whole lot of advertising dollars in there most Saturdays.
That's an inaccurate observation.
It is.
That's very inaccurate.
That's a moneymaker, and
Yeah,
ultimately, the short answer is that ultimately that Saturday paper will be, I think, a sixth day in terms of its editorial looks. In fact, it'll be a sixth day of the 5-day paper.
All right, there are some sections in here that don't seem to carry a lot of
that's right.
advertising, and that's why I say the
No,
observation
it's a strong
indicates
paper, and that was the first, I suppose, the first step back in '77 to what eventually became the merged two papers, and that one has existed independently of the other daily 5-day daily newspapers.
And we're not going to fool around with a Sunday paper. People like it the way it is.
What happens now? You don't have any competition within the city of Minneapolis anymore. What do you do to fight off complacency in the newsroom? You know, when you got somebody breathing down your neck from a competitor, you're going to dig harder, and you know that from experience.
Those people who were so jumpy for the last couple of weeks about whether they had jobs or not, I think are unlikely to get complacent in the near term. And newspaper people find a way of motivating themselves.
All right, here is a self-serving question. How many TV critics are you going to keep on staff? I see Carmen writing Monday through Friday, off and on, and you've got Gelfand back on Sunday again.
We hope that all the people who are going to leave have already left. We plan to keep them both and plan to let them go on writing, both go on writing about your business.
Just one question that I have to ask. Is the Star and Tribune Company for sale? There are some rumors flying around circles.
The Star and Tribune Company is not for sale.
All right.
Period.
And never has been.
And never has been.
All right. You sanguine about the future? Is this going to be a
not.
going proposition?
Of course I'm not
What about
sanguine
the
about the
Shankelovich
future.
study that you commissioned last November? What flaws in the operation, in the Tribune especially,
What
does
that
show?
survey showed us, that survey was a survey designed
Real fast, Mr. Bailey,
to
if you
get
could, I'm
some,
sorry.
to help us design the new paper. Not everybody that was involved in it knew that at that time, but that's what it was designed for, and it was very useful to us in suggesting, for example, that we ought to bring the variety section over from the Star pretty much intact, that kind of thing.
Right.
It also said that people like news.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time. Appreciate it very much. And thank you very much, and I hope you can join us again for the future editions of Dialogue. Good afternoon.
Not strung and was in pieces.
I see that, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
You see if it's the same piece that I looked at earlier. Yes, it is, and this is not from